1 if by land, and 2 if by sea.
Imagine, if you will, a time before skyscrapers pierced the clouds, before the roar of traffic filled the air. Let's travel back to the 1770s, to a city nestled on a peninsula, cradled by the cold waters of the Atlantic. This is Boston, a crown jewel of colonial America, yet a town simmering with a quiet fire. As dusk descends, the city transforms. The day's hustle, the clatter of wagon wheels, the cries of merchants, the hammering from shipyards, fades into a murmur. What takes its place is a profound, almost watchful, quiet. Picture yourself walking down one of its narrow, winding lanes. The ground beneath your feet isn't smooth pavement, but uneven cobblestones, slick with evening mist, each one a stone witness to history. The only light comes from the gentle, golden flicker of oil lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows that play tricks on the eyes. A figure disappearing around a corner could be a late-night traveler or a phantom of the past. The air is crisp, carrying the salty temps of the harbor. You can hear the sigh of the wind as it whispers through the rigging of the tall ships moored at Long Wharf, their masts like a skeletal forest against the bruised twilight sky. These ships are the city's lifeline, bringing goods, news, and people from across a vast ocean. But lately, they've also brought soldiers in redcoats and decrees from a distant king, and the harbor wind seems to carry a new, colder edge. Listen closely. Beyond the rhythmic creak of wooden sins a tavern's swinging tankard, a baker's sheaf of wheat there or other sounds. The low hum of conversation spills from the open door of a public house, where men huddle over pewter mugs of ale. Their voices are hushed, their glances furtive. Words like liberty, tyranny, and rights are exchanged, not in bold declarations, but in guarded whispers. Every shadow seems to hold a secret, every darkened alleyway a clandestine meeting. This is a city of two minds. By day, it is a bustling hub of British commerce, loyal to the crown. But by night, another Boston awakens. In upstairs print shops, presses secretly churn out pamphlets that speak of revolution. In the back rooms of rope walks and distilleries, groups like the Sons of Liberty gather, their faces illuminated by a single candle, their hearts ignited by a shared dream of independence. The very air is thick with tension, a feeling as palpable as the damp chill rising from the harbor. You can feel the city holding its breath. The quiet of the streets is not the quiet of peace, but the hush before a storm. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant shout, every sudden clang of a church bell makes you jump. The presence of British soldiers is a constant, visible reminder of the Crown's authority. Their disciplined patrols, the glint of moonlight on their bayonets, create an undercurrent of friction. Colonists and soldiers share the same streets, but they live in different worlds. Their gazes meeting with a mixture of resentment, suspicion, and sometimes outright hostility. Let's stroll down King Street, the heart of the city's official life. Here stands the old State House, its balcony a stage for royal proclamations. Just a few years prior, this very street was the site of a bloody confrontation, a massacre that left an indelible scar on the city's soul. The cobblestones here seem darker, forever stained by the memory of that winter night. The tension has only deepened since then, hardened into a resolve that grows stronger with each new tax, each new act of perceived oppression. The people of Boston are a study in contrasts. They're the wealthy merchants, their fortunes tied to trade with England, who walk a tightrope of loyalty. They're the fiery artisans and laborers, their livelihoods threatened, their patience worn thin. There are women who organize boycotts of British goods, finding their own ways to resist. And there are the intellectuals, the lawyers and writers, who shape the philosophy of rebellion, giving voice to the deep-seated yearning for self. In these quiet streets, a revolution is not just being planned, it is being lived. It is in the silent nod between strangers who recognize a fellow patriot. It is in the coded messages passed from hand to hand. It is in the prayers whispered in the pews of the Old South Meeting House, a place of worship that doubles as a forum for political dissent. The city's architecture itself tells the story. Sturdy brick townhouses stand shoulder to shoulder, their windows like watchful eyes. Hidden gardens and courtyards offer secluded spots for conspirators. The labyrinthine network of alleys and backways, a puzzle to outsiders, provides escape routes and secret pathways for those who move in the shadows. Boston is a city built for secrets. As we continue our walk, the night deepens. The lanterns burn lower, their light becoming softer. The hush is now almost absolute, broken only by the mournful cry of a gull over the water or the distant chime of a ship's bell marking the hour. In this profound quiet, you can almost hear the gears of history turning. You can feel the collective pulse of a people on the verge of a momentous decision, a choice that will not only determine their own fate, but will echo through the centuries and shape the course of a nation yet to be born. This is Boston in the 1770s. A city of shadows and whispers, of cobblestones and sea winds. It is a place where the air is electric with unspoken thoughts, and the silence is louder than any shout. The quiet streets are not empty. They are full of anticipation, brimming with the potent energy of a rebellion waiting for its spark. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the first act of the American drama is about to begin. The world will soon hear the roar that comes from these quiet streets. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into Colonial Boston fascinating, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories from history. Your support means the world. See you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our journey through revolutionary Boston. Last time, we walked the cobbled streets and felt the tension in the air. Today, we're looking up towards the heavens to understand the heart and soul of this city. Imagine Boston in the 1770s. Before brick townhouses and towering glass structures, the skyline was a forest of spires. Church steeples punctuated the sky, each one a landmark, a beacon, and a declaration. This wasn't just a city of merchants and mariners. It was a city of churches, a deeply pious place where faith was woven into the very fabric of daily life. From the elegant spire of the Old South Meeting House to the sturdy tower of King's Chapel, these buildings were more than just places of worship. They were the centers of community, the venues for town meetings, and the moral compass for a society on the brink of monumental change. Every Sunday, the city would come to a standstill. The clatter of carts would cease, the shops would shutter, and the air would fill with the sound of ringing bells, calling the faithful to prayer. But beneath these holy roofs, the congregations were far from united. The same pews held neighbors who were becoming bitter political rivals. The sermons that echoed from the pulpits were often infused with the fiery rhetoric of the times. Was the king ordained by God, a ruler to be obeyed without question? Or were the rights of man, the liberties they cherished, a divine gift worth fighting? And let's step inside one of these historic churches, say Christ Church, now known as the Old North Church. It was an Anglican church, part of the Church of England. Its rector, Mather Byles Jr., was a staunch loyalist, a firm believer in the Crown's authority. His sermons would have emphasized order, obedience, and loyalty to King George III. For many in his congregation, loyalty to the king was synonymous with loyalty to God. They saw the growing patriot movement as a dangerous, chaotic rebellion against a divinely sanctioned structure. They were the establishment, the well-to-do, who benefited from the colonial system. The idea of severing ties with Britain was not just politically treasonous. To some, it felt like a spiritual betrayal. Now, let's walk a few blocks over to the Old South Meeting House. This was a Congregationalist church, born from the Puritan tradition. It wasn't just a church, it was the largest building in colonial Boston, and it became the main stage for the Revolution's most dramatic moments. Its pews were filled with patriots, men like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Dr. Joseph Warren. Here, the sermons took on a different tone. Ministers like Samuel Cooper would preach about liberty, tyranny, and the moral duty to resist oppression. They drew parallels between the Israelites' flight from Egypt and the colonists' struggle against British rule. For these patriots, the fight for freedom was a righteous, even holy, cause. They believed God was on the side of the oppressed, and that standing up for their rights was fulfilling a divine purpose. It was within these walls that thousands gathered to protest the Tea Act, A meeting that famously ended with the cry, "Boston Harbor, a teapot tonight." And then there were those caught in the middle. Many Bostonians were not staunch loyalists or fiery patriots. They were simply people trying to live their lives, raise their families, and run their businesses. They attended church, prayed for peace, and hoped the growing conflict would simply go away. They listened to sermons from both sides, torn between loyalty to their heritage and sympathy for their neighbors' grievances. Imagine the quiet turmoil of a shopkeeper who supplied both British soldiers and patriot families. In church, he might sit between a man who toasted the king and another who secretly stockpiled gunpowder. The weekly sermon became a tightrope walk for many ministers who tried to preach unity and peace to a congregation that was fracturing along political lines. Their prayers were for reconciliation in a city where that was becoming increasingly impossible. The physical buildings themselves became symbols of this divide. King's Chapel, another Anglican church, was seen by many patriots as a symbol of British authority and opulence. Its stone facade stood in stark contrast to the simpler wooden meeting houses of the Congregationalists. Meanwhile, the Old South Meeting House became so synonymous with the patriot cause that during the siege of Boston, British officers desecrated it. They gutted the interior, tore out the pews, and turned it into a riding school for their cavalry. It was an act of profound disrespect, intended to demoralize the patriots by defiling their most sacred public space. The message was clear: your rebellion is not just against the king, but against the very order of things, and even your holy places are not safe. So, as we look at the Boston skyline of the 1770s, we see more than just architecture. We see a city at war with itself. Each steeple represents a community, a set of beliefs, and a side in a conflict that was tearing the empire apart. The bells that called people to worship also told for a way of life that was coming to an end. The sermons preached of heaven and hell, but the real battle was being fought right here on Earth, in the hearts and minds of the people of Boston. The path to revolution wasn't just paved with political pamphlets and economic grievances. It was carved through the spiritual core of the city, a city of churches and of conflict. In our next chapter, we'll meet the key players in this drama: the firebrands, the loyalists, the spies, and the ordinary people who would soon be forced to choose a side. The characters who would shape the destiny of a nation are waiting in the wings. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. If you're enjoying this series and want to learn what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We'd love to have you with us for the entire journey. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through Boston's revolutionary past. In our last chapter, we explored the seeds of dissent being sown. Today, we turn our attention to a structure that would become a silent, yet powerful, character in this unfolding drama. The Old North Church. Let's travel back to the year 1723. Boston is a bustling, growing town, a vital port in the British colonies. Its skyline is a mix of wooden houses, wharves, and the spires of its many churches. In the North End, a vibrant, crowded neighborhood filled with artisans, mariners, and merchants. A new Anglican congregation has formed. They call themselves Christ Church, and they have a vision to build a house of worship that reflects their faith, their aspirations, and their place in this burgeoning new world. The site they chose was on Salem Street, a prominent spot in the heart of the North End. But what kind of church would they build? At the time, most Boston churches were constructed from wood, but this congregation wanted something different, something more permanent, more substantial. They decided on brick. This was a bold and expensive choice, signifying a commitment to creating a landmark that would endure for generations. It was a statement of stability and presence. The design of the church was entrusted to William Price, a local cartographer and print seller, who also had a talent for architecture. Price drew his inspiration from the great London churches designed by Sir Christopher Wren, the architect who had rebuilt the city after the Great Fire of 1666. If you look at churches like St. James's in Piccadilly, you can see the family resemblance, the elegant simplicity, the clean lines, the harmonious blend of classical elements. Construction began. Imagine the scene: the clang of hammers, the scrape of trowels against brick, the shouts of craftsmen. Local artisans, many of whom were members of the congregation itself, poured their skill and labor into the project. The bricks, laid in a pattern known as English bond, were likely fired right here in the Boston area, connecting the church physically to the very soil of New England. The lumber for the interior, the massive beams and fine woodwork, was harvested from the region's abundant forests. This wasn't just a building, it was a community effort, a testament to local craftsmanship. Inside, the design was just as thoughtful. They planned for high-arched windows to flood the sanctuary with natural light, creating a sense of openness and reverence. The layout was designed for clear sight lines to the pulpit, emphasizing the importance of the sermon in Anglican worship. One of the most unique features they planned was the box pews. These weren't just benches. They were enclosed spaces that families would purchase and furnish themselves. It was a reflection of the social structure of the time, with each family having their own designated space within the larger church community. But the most iconic feature, the one that would literally and figuratively elevate the church above its surroundings, was the steeple. This wasn't just an architectural flourish. It was a declaration. Rising high above the rooftops of the North End, it would be the tallest structure in Boston. Think about what that meant. In a time before skyscrapers, the steeple was a beacon. It was the first thing sailors would see as they approached Boston Harbor, a reassuring landmark guiding them home. It was a point of reference for everyone in the city, a symbol of faith and community visible for miles around. The original steeple, the one that stood in 1723, was a masterpiece of Georgian design. It rose an astonishing 191 feet into the air. Let's put that in perspective. That's roughly the height of a 19-story building today. Crafted from wood and sheathed in shingles, it was an elegant, soaring structure that tapered gracefully toward the sky, crowned with a gleaming weather vane. It was a marvel of 18th century engineering and a source of immense civic pride. When the church was completed, it was a magnificent sight. The warm red brick, the pristine white trim of the windows, and that towering, majestic steeple. The Old North Church, or Christ Church, as it was then known, wasn't just the newest church in Boston. It was a statement. It spoke of permanence, of ambition, and of a community looking toward the future. It was solid, it was elegant, and it was grounded, yet its steeple reached for the heavens. The congregation that filled these pews was a cross-section of North End society. There were wealthy merchants who owned the ships in the harbor, skilled artisans like silversmiths and furniture makers, and humble maroners and their families. They came together here, under this roof, to christen their children, to marry, and to mourn their dead. The church quickly became the heart of the community. But as the years passed, the world outside these brick walls was changing. The quiet prayers and sermons within would soon be contrasted by the rising clamor for liberty in the streets. This beautiful building, designed as a symbol of loyalty to the Church of England and the Crown, was destined for a very different role. Its parishioners, men who had sat in these very pews, would find themselves on opposite sides of a brewing conflict. The towering steeple, built as a beacon for ships and a symbol of faith, was about to become something more. It was poised to become a signal tower, a silent messenger in the night, a symbol not just of Boston, but of American liberty itself. The stage was set, the players were in place, and this magnificent church, born in 1723, was about to step into its most famous role. Join us in the next chapter as we explore how the political tensions simmering in Boston finally reached a boiling point, and how two simple lanterns, hung in the steeple of the Old North Church, would ignite a revolution. Thanks so much for watching. If you're enjoying this journey into history, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our journey through history. In this chapter, we step into a world seemingly untouched by time, into the heart of parish life, just before the great upheaval of the Revolution. Let's close our eyes for a moment and imagine a Sunday morning in a small, rural village. The air is still, carrying the sweet scent of hay and damp earth. Then, a sound breaks the silence, a familiar, reassuring clang that echoes across the fields and through the winding cobblestone streets. It's the church bell, a steadfast call to the community, a rhythm that has marked the passing of weeks for generations. Families begin to emerge from their modest homes, dressed in their Sunday best. The father, his hands calloused from a week of labor, walks with a quiet dignity, his wife beside him, her bonnet neatly tied. Their children, scrubbed clean and perhaps a little restless, follow along, their small shoes scuffing the worn path. They are not just individuals, they are a tapestry of intertwined lives, heading towards the one place that binds them all together. The church stands as the village's anchor, its stone spire a constant landmark against the sky. As they approach, the murmur of greetings fills the air. Neighbors who have toiled side by side all week now exchange pleasantries, sharing news of a good harvest, a new birth, or a shared worry. Pushing open the heavy oak doors, they step from the bright morning light into the cool, hallowed dimness of the sanctuary. The air inside is thick with history, a unique blend of scents that speaks of centuries of devotion. There's the earthy, polished aroma of old wood from the pews, worn smooth by countless hands and generations of worshippers. Mingled with it is the faint, sweet smell of beeswax from the candles flickering at the altar, their gentle light dancing on the stone walls and casting long, soft shadows. Dust motes drift lazily in the beams of colored light filtering through the stained glass windows, each pane telling a silent story from the scriptures. This is more than just a building. It is the repository of the village's collective memory. Every christening, every wedding, every funeral has taken place within these walls. The very stones seem to hold the echoes of prayers, songs, and sorrows. The parish priest, often the only educated man for miles, is not just a spiritual guide but a counselor, a teacher, and a keeper of records. He knows every family, every child by name. His word carries weight, settling disputes and offering comfort in times of hardship. His life is as intertwined with the villagers as the threads of a loom. The service begins. The Latin chants, though not fully understood by many in the congregation, are deeply familiar. The sounds are a form of comfort, a sacred and unchanging ritual in a life often filled with uncertainty. The rhythm of the Mass is the rhythm of their spiritual lives. It marks the seasons of the year, from the solemnity of Lent to the joyous celebration of Easter and the festive warmth of Christmas. These rituals provide structure and meaning, a way to make sense of the world and their place within it. Life is governed by two calendars: the agricultural calendar of planting and harvesting, and the liturgical calendar of feasts and fasts. Beyond the Sunday service, the church is the center of social life. Festivals and saints' days are cause for celebration, a welcome break from the relentless cycle of work. The church square transforms into a lively market, a place for games, for music, for a rare taste of a sweet treat. These are the moments that weave the community together, strengthening bonds of kinship and friendship. It is here that young people meet under the watchful eyes of their elders, where courtships begin, and where the future of the village is quietly forged. In this pre-revolutionary world, faith is not a private matter. It is a public, communal experience. It dictates morality, shapes identity, and provides a social safety net. When a family falls on hard times, it is the parish community, guided by the principles of charity, that steps in to help. The concept of a secular world, of a life lived outside the shadow of the church spire, is almost unimaginable. The parish is their world, its boundaries defining their reality. The ringing of the Angelus bell 3 times a day is a reminder to pause, to pray, to connect with the divine in the midst of their daily toil. Life is hard, there is no denying it. Poverty is widespread, infant mortality is high, and the harvest is always at the mercy of the weather. Yet, within this hardship, there is a profound sense of order and belonging. Each person has their place, their role, their duties. This structure, reinforced by the church, provides a sense of security, a belief that even in suffering, there is a divine plan. The world is as it should be, ordained by God. The idea of radically changing this order, of questioning the authority of the church and the king, is a distant, almost alien concept. But even in this tranquil setting, the seeds of change are being sown, carried on the winds from the bustling cities and the intellectual salons. Whispers of new ideas of rights, of reason, of the individual are beginning to reach even these isolated corners of the realm. For now, they are just murmurs, easily dismissed amidst the familiar comforts of tradition and faith. The tolling of the church bell still drowns out the distant rumble of the coming storm. The scent of candle wax and old wood still masks the scent of gunpowder that will soon fill the air. This was the world on the brink, a world of deep faith, of close-knit communities, of lives lived according to ancient rhythms. It was a world that seemed eternal, as solid and enduring as the stone walls of the parish church itself, but the foundations were trembling. The quiet devotion and communal harmony we've witnessed today would soon be tested in a crucible of fire and blood. The tranquil life of the parish was about to be shattered, and the world would never be the same again. Understanding this life, in all its simple, profound detail, is crucial to understanding the sheer magnitude of the cataclysm that was to follow. Thank you for joining me in this chapter of our story. I hope it gave you a deeper appreciation for the world that was lost. If you found this journey insightful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the past. Your support helps us continue to bring these stories to life. We'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our journey through American history. When the dust settled from the French and Indian War, the British Empire was vast, but its treasury was empty. Looking at the American colonies, which had benefited from British protection, Parliament saw a solution. They thought, it's only fair the colonies help pay for their own defense. This simple idea would light the fuse of a revolution. The first major spark was the Stamp Act of 1765. Imagine this. Suddenly, every piece of paper you used, from legal documents and newspapers to playing cards, required a special stamp that you had to pay for. This wasn't just a nuisance. It was a tax imposed by a government thousands of miles away, where colonists had no representatives. The outcry was immediate and fierce. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry echoing from Boston to Charleston. Colonists weren't just angry about the money. They were furious about the principle. They saw it as a violation of their rights as Englishmen. The pressure worked, and Parliament repealed the Stamp Act. But they weren't backing down. They passed the Declaratory Act, basically saying, we repealed the tax, but don't forget, we still have the power to tax you whenever we want. The tension didn't disappear. It just simmered beneath the surface. Then came the Townshend Acts in 1767. These were taxes on imported goods like glass, lead, paint, paper, and most famously, tea. Once again, the colonists resisted. They organized boycotts, refusing to buy British goods. Women, who managed the households, became central to this resistance. They led the charge, finding American-made alternatives, weaving their own cloth, and brewing their own Liberty tea from local herbs. It was a powerful economic protest that hit British merchants right where it hurt. Their wallets. The British government responded not with compromise, but with force. They sent soldiers, redcoats, to keep order, especially in the hotbed of resistance. Boston, having thousands of soldiers occupying your city, was a constant, visible reminder of British authority. The friction was palpable. Scuffles and arguments between soldiers and colonists became daily occurrences. The city was a powder keg, and on March 5, 1770, it finally exploded. It started with taunts and snowballs thrown at a British sentry. More soldiers arrived. A crowd gathered, and the situation escalated into chaos. Someone yelled fire, and the soldiers discharged their muskets into the crowd. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead or dying on the street. Paul Revere, a silversmith and a patriot, created a powerful engraving of the event, which encoded the bloody massacre. This image spread like wildfire throughout the colonies, portraying the British as brutal tyrants and the colonists as innocent victims. The Boston Massacre, as it became known, was a public relations disaster for the Crown and a powerful propaganda tool for the Patriots. Faced with colonial outrage and another effective boycott, Parliament once again backed down, repealing most of the Townshend Acts. They left just one tax in place. The tax on tea. This wasn't about raising money anymore. It was a symbolic act, a stubborn insistence on their right to tax the colonies. For a couple of years, an uneasy calm settled over America. But that single, lingering tax on tea would soon lead to the most defiant act of protest yet. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. It was a clever move. designed to bail out the struggling British East India Company by allowing them to sell tea directly to the colonies, bypassing colonial merchants. Even with the tax, this tea was cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea. Most colonists drank. Parliament thought the colonists wouldn't be able to resist a bargain. They were wrong. The colonists weren't fooled. They saw the Tea Act for what it was, a trick to get them to accept Parliament's right to tax them. It was a Trojan horse. They weren't just going to pay the tax, they were going to make a statement. In ports like New York and Philadelphia, protesters forced the tea ships to turn back. But in Boston, the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, was determined to see the tea unloaded and the tax paid. The Patriots of Boston, led by figures like Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty, had other plans. On the cold night of December 16, 1773, after a massive town meeting, a group of colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, marched to Griffin's Wharf. They boarded 3 ships loaded with tea, and in front of a crowd of thousands, they systematically smashed open 342 chests and dumped the entire cargo tons of tea into Boston Harbor. This act of defiance, which would become known as the Boston Tea Party, was not a riot. It was a calculated and organized political protest. The news of the Boston Tea Party shocked both sides of the Atlantic. In America, it was celebrated by many as a bold stand against tyranny. In London, King George III and Parliament were absolutely livid. They saw it as a direct assault on British authority and property. They were done with compromise. Their response would be swift and severe, designed to punish Boston and bring the rebellious colony of Massachusetts to its knees. Parliament passed a series of laws that the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. The Boston Port Act closed the harbor to all trade until the city paid for the destroyed tea. The Massachusetts Government Act stripped the colony of its charter and gave the royal governor unprecedented power. The Administration of Justice Act allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England, not in the colonies, and a new quartering act allowed soldiers to be housed in private homes. These acts were meant to isolate and make an example of Massachusetts, but they had the opposite effect. The other colonies saw the plight of Boston as a threat to their own liberties. If Parliament could do this to one colony, they could do it to any of them. Instead of dividing them, the Intolerable Acts united them. Food and supplies poured into Boston from all over America. A sense of shared destiny, of being American, was solidifying. In response to this crisis, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia in September 1774 for the First Continental Congress. They weren't calling for independence, not yet. Their goal was to find a solution, to articulate their rights and grievances, and to coordinate a unified response. They called for a complete boycott of British goods and began to organize They sent a petition to the king, pleading for him to intervene and restore their rights. But the king and Parliament were not in a mood to listen. The storm had gathered. The lines had been drawn. The voices of moderation were drowned out by the drums of war. The colonies were on a collision course with the most powerful empire on earth. The faint echo of musket fire from the Boston Massacre was about to become a deafening roar that would change the world forever. Thanks for watching. We're getting closer to the moment of truth in our story. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where revolution finally erupts. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the American Revolution. Today, we're diving into Chapter 6. The Sons of Liberty. In the years leading up to the war, a quiet storm was brewing in the bustling port city of Boston. It wasn't in the halls of power or on the fields of battle, but in the dimly lit back rooms of taverns and the dusty corners of workshops. This is where a new kind of patriot began to emerge, a clandestine network of thinkers and doers who called themselves the Sons of Liberty. Who were these men? They weren't generals or aristocrats. They were brewers, silversmiths, printers, and merchants, ordinary men from the middle ranks of colonial society. But what they lacked in titles, they made up for with an extraordinary and unshakable resolve. They saw the growing reach of British policy, the stamps, the taxes, the soldiers, not just as an economic burden, but as a direct assault on their fundamental rights as Englishmen. At the heart of this web was Samuel Adams. He was more than just a brewer and a failed tax collector. He was a political genius, a master of propaganda, and the tireless engine of the resistance movement. Adams had a unique gift for communication. He understood the power of the written word, penning fiery articles and letters under various pseudonyms that circulated throughout the colonies. He could translate complex legal and philosophical arguments about representation and liberty into simple, powerful ideas that resonated with the common person. He knew how to stir emotions, how to frame the narrative, and how to organize people. Tois Gosin, the more moderate John Adams. Samuel was a radical, a man who seemed to be playing with fire. But to the artisans and mechanics of Boston, he was a voice for their frustrations and their highest aspirations. He was the chief architect of the rebellion's intellectual foundation. Then there was Paul Revere. Today, he's immortalized for a single midnight ride, but his role was far deeper and more consistent. By trade, he was a master silversmith, one of the finest in the colonies. His work was a symbol of colonial craftsmanship and prosperity, but his true passion lay in the cause of liberty. Revere was the network's trusted messenger and its eyes and ears. His business took him all over Boston, into the homes of the rich and the shops of the poor. He knew everyone, and everyone knew him. This social mobility made him an invaluable intelligence agent. He could gather information, gauge public opinion, and discreetly deliver messages between the scattered cells of patriots. He was a connector, the human link that held the disparate parts of the movement together. He didn't just carry messages. He carried the lifeblood of the revolution. Another key figure was Dr. Joseph Warren, a handsome, charismatic, and respected physician. Warren moved in more elite circles than many of the other Sons of Liberty, often treating both patriots and British officials. This unique position gave him access to sensitive information. He was a brilliant orator and a strategic thinker, quickly becoming one of the movement's most prominent leaders. His public presence gave the Sons a veneer of respectability, while his private actions were deeply radical. Warren was the one who, on the fateful night of April 18, 1775, would confirm British plans and dispatch Revere and William Dawes on their famous rides. He was a man of action, a leader who would ultimately make the ultimate sacrifice for his beliefs at the Battle of Bunker Hill. These men, and others like James Otis, the fiery lawyer who first railed against the writs of assistance, or John Hancock, the wealthy merchant whose financial backing was crucial, formed the core of the Boston resistance. Their meeting places were as unassuming as they were. They gathered at the Green Dragon Tavern, which became known as the headquarters of the Revolution. They met in the attic of a print shop, the smell of ink and paper filling the air as they plotted their next move. They convened in Revere's silversmith workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade. These weren't grand council chambers. They were the spaces of everyday life, infused with the dangerous spirit of rebellion. Their methods were initially focused on protests and pressure. They organized boycotts of British goods, a powerful economic weapon that hit British merchants where it hurt most their wallets. They understood that collective action was key. They coordinated the non-importation agreements, convincing and sometimes coercing local merchants to stop selling British products. They staged public demonstrations, erecting liberty trees or liberty poles as powerful symbols of their cause. These were gathering points for speeches, protests, and sometimes for hanging effigies of hated officials like the stamp distributor Andrew Oliver. This was a psychological war as much as a political one. The Sons of Liberty were masters of political theater. They knew how to create a spectacle that would capture public attention and galvanize support. The hanging of an effigy, for instance, was a deeply symbolic act. It was a way of publicly shaming and intimidating British officials without resorting to actual violence against them, though that line was often blurred. They organized parades and processions, turning political protest into a form of community event. They printed pamphlets, political cartoons, and broadsides that simplified the conflict into a clear struggle of liberty versus tyranny, good versus evil. Revere himself was a talented engraver, and his depiction of the Boston Massacre became one of the most effective pieces of propaganda in American history, shaping public opinion far beyond the borders of Massachusetts. Their secrecy was paramount. In an era without digital communication, they relied on codes, truce et coeri, and the sanctity of their hidden meeting spots. They operated in the shadows because they had to. What they were doing was sedition, treason, in the eyes of the crown. If caught, and convicted, they could face imprisonment or even the gallows. This constant danger forged an unbreakable bond of trust and loyalty among them. They were brothers in a cause that could cost them everything: their businesses, their families, their very lives. Every whispered conversation in a tavern, every coded letter passed by hand, was a risk. It's crucial to understand that the Sons of Liberty were not a monolithic entity. They were a loose-knit confederation of groups that sprang up in various colonies, from New York to Charleston. While the Boston group was arguably the most radical and influential, they all shared a common purpose. They established committees of correspondence, a brilliant innovation championed by Samuel Adams. These committees were formal networks for sharing information and coordinating strategy between the colonies. A letter from Boston describing a new British tax or the arrival of troops could be on its way to Virginia within days, creating a sense of shared grievance and unified opposition. This communication network was the nervous system of the revolution, transforming a series of local disputes into a continental movement. These were the Sons of Liberty. They were the organizers, the propagandists, and the enforcers of the revolution's early stages. They were ordinary men who found themselves in an extraordinary time and rose to the occasion with courage, ingenuity, and a fierce love for what they called their sacred liberties. They took the abstract ideals of the Enlightenment, debated in the parlors of philosophers, and brought them onto the cobblestone streets. They demonstrated that real power didn't just reside in parliaments or with kings, but with determined people, meeting in secret, willing to risk it all for a future they believed in. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped not by the few in high places, but by the many in the back rooms. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. If you're finding this series insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these vital stories to life. We'll see you next time as the tensions in Boston finally reach a boiling point. Welcome back to our journey through American history. Today, we re-diving into one of the most iconic moments of the American Revolution, the legendary midnight ride of Paul Revere. It's a story of courage, clever signals, and a warning that ignited a nation. The date is April 18th, 1775. Tensions in Boston are at a boiling point. The city is occupied by thousands of British soldiers, or redcoats, and the air is thick with whispers of rebellion. The local patriots, known as the Sons of Liberty, have been stockpiling weapons and ammunition in the nearby town of Concord, just in case things take a turn for the worse. And on this fateful night, they do. Dr. Joseph Warren, a key leader of the Patriot movement in Boston, receives a crucial piece of intelligence. The British are on the move. General Thomas Gary, the British commander, has ordered his troops to march on Concord, seize the Patriots' arsenal, and potentially arrest key leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who are hiding in Lexington. The time for action is now. Warren knows he needs to get a message out to the countryside, and he knows just the man for the job. A silversmith, engraver, and ardent patriot named Paul Revere. Revere's mission was perilous. He had to sneak out of a city under military lockdown and ride through the night to warn Adams, Hancock, and the militia in the surrounding towns. But first, he needed a way to alert his comrades across the Charles River in Charlestown about how the British were leaving Boston. This is where one of the most famous signals in American history comes into play. Revere arranged a plan with Robert Newman, the sexton of the Old North Church. Newman would hang lanterns in the church's steeple. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. If the British marched out of Boston by land over the narrow strip called Boston Neck, he would hang 1 lantern. If they took boats across the Charles River to start their march, he would hang 2. This brilliant, simple system would ensure the message got out, even if Revere himself was captured before he could cross the river. As dusk fell, Revere confirmed the British were preparing to cross the river. The signal was given. 2 lanterns flickered to life in the dark steeple of the Old North Church, their light beaming across the water torches. In Charlestown, the sea route was chosen. Meanwhile, Revere prepared for his own dangerous journey. With the help of 2 friends, he was secretly rowed across the Charles River, right under the nose of the British warship HMS Somerset. His horse, which a friend had arranged, was waiting for him on the other side. Once on his horse, Revere set off at a gallop. But this wasn't a one-man show. The Sons of Liberty had a whole network of riders. Another rider, William Dawes, was sent out by a different, longer land route. Revere's path took him straight through towns like Somerville, Medford, and Arlington. He wasn't just shouting, "The British are coming." As the popular legend goes, that wouldn't have made sense, as most colonists still considered themselves British. Instead, he was likely much more specific, yelling things like "The regulars are coming out," or "The regulars are marching to Concord." He would bang on doors, alert the captains of the local Minutemen, and tell them to muster their forces. His ride was a race against time. He knew British patrols were scouring the roads. At one point near Charlestown, he spotted 2 British officers on horseback and had to veer off the main road, riding so hard he nearly got thrown from his horse. He managed to evade them and pressed on, his horse's hooves pounding a rhythm of urgency into the dirt roads. He reached Lexington around midnight, finding Samuel Adams and John Hancock at the home of Reverend Jonas Clark. He delivered his urgent warning, ensuring that 2 revolutionary leaders would have time to escape. Shortly after, William Dawes arrived, having completed his own ride. The 2 men decided not to stop there. Concord and its weapons cache were still the primary target. So, they set off again, this time joined by a young doctor named Samuel Prescott, who had been in Lexington visiting his fiancée. The trio rode on towards Concord, spreading the alarm. But their luck was about to run out. Between Lexington and Concord, they ran straight into a British patrol. Revere was captured. Dawes, in the chaos, was thrown from his horse, but managed to escape into the woods. But Dr. Prescott, who knew the area well, jumped his horse over a stone wall and successfully escaped. This twist of fate was incredibly important. While Revere's ride ended there, Prescott carried the message the rest of the way to Concord. He was the one who actually alerted the Minutemen in Concord that the British Army was on its way to seize their supplies. So, while Paul Revere was the mastermind behind the signal and the first crucial messenger, his capture didn't stop the alarm. Thanks to the network of riders and the quick thinking of men like Prescott, the entire countryside was buzzing with activity by the time the British troops arrived. When the Redcoats marched into Lexington on the morning of April 19th, they weren't met with a sleeping village. Instead, they found a small but determined company of about 77 Minutemen assembled on the town green. The shot heard round the world was fired, and the American Revolution began in earnest. The British then continued their march to Concord, only to find that the Patriots had already moved most of the weapons and ammunition. At Concord's North Bridge, they were met by a much larger force of Colonial militia, and a fierce battle ensued, forcing the British to retreat back to Boston. The ride of Paul Revere and his fellow messengers was a resounding success. It was a perfectly executed intelligence operation that gave the Colonial militia the precious time they needed to organize and prepare. It showed that the colonists were not just a disorganized mob. They were a coordinated and determined force capable of standing up to the most powerful army in the world. Paul Revere's name became legendary, immortalized in Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride. While the poem takes some artistic liberties, it captures the spirit of that night, the courage, the urgency, and the powerful idea that one person's actions can change the course of history. Thank you so much for watching. This story is a powerful reminder of how communication and bravery can spark a revolution. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Welcome, bike history buffs and freedom lovers. Last time, we left our heroes on the brink of a monumental decision. The air in Boston was thick with tension, whispers of rebellion mixing with the salty sea breeze. Today, we're diving into Chapter 8, the Signal Plan. This isn't just a chapter in a book, it's the ingenious spark that would ignite the flames of the American Revolution. Picture this. April 1775. Boston is a powder keg. The British troops, the Redcoats, are preparing to march. Their mission: to seize a cache of weapons and ammunition stockpiled by the Colonial militia in Concord, and potentially arrest key Patriot leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington. The colonists knew something was coming, but they didn't know how or when communication was slow, roads were treacherous, and every second counted. A single mistake, a delayed message, could mean the difference between liberty and tyranny. How could they possibly warn the countryside in time? This is where the brilliance of the Sons of Liberty shines through. They needed a plan that was fast, foolproof, and couldn't be easily intercepted. Forget sending a letter. A messenger could be captured. Forget shouting. Voices don't carry far enough. They needed something that could cut through the darkness and silence of the night, a beacon of warning visible for miles. The answer lay in the heart of Boston itself, high above the winding streets. In the steeple of the Old North Church, Dr. Joseph Warren, a key leader of the resistance, devised the plan with Paul Revere. It was a masterpiece of simplicity and strategic genius. The plan revolved around a secret code, a phrase that has echoed through the halls of American history ever since. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. Let's break that down. The land route meant the British would march out of Boston over the narrow strip of land called Boston Neck, a long and dusty road. The sea route was faster. They would cross the Charles River by boat to Cambridge, cutting their travel time significantly. The route they chose would determine how much time the Minutemen had to prepare. The Old North Church was the perfect location. As the tallest building in Boston at the time, its steeple offered an unobstructed view across the river to Charlestown, where other riders would be waiting. The church's sexton, a man named Robert Newman, was a staunch patriot. He was the one entrusted with the dangerous task of climbing the dark, creaking stairs of the steeple, a lantern in each hand, waiting for the signal. He was risking everything. If caught, he would have been hanged as a traitor. So, here's how it would work. Paul Revere would do his own reconnaissance, confirming the British movements. Before he set off on his famous ride, he would give the final word to a fellow patriot, who would then signal Robert Newman. If the British were marching out by land, Newman would light and hang asterisk. 1 asterisk. Lantern in the belfry arch. Just one light, a solitary flame, signaling the long march. But if they were taking to the boats, crossing the Charles River, he would hang asterisk to asterisk lanterns. 2 flickering lights, a stark warning that the threat was coming faster, by water. Across the river in Charlestown, other patriots, including Colonel Conant and members of the local committee of safety, would be watching the steeple with eagle eyes. They were the second link in this vital chain of communication. The moment they saw the lights, one or two they would know. That was their cue to alert the waiting riders, who would then gallop into the countryside, spreading the alarm to every village and farm. This wasn't just Paul Revere's ride. It was a coordinated effort, a network of brave men and women working in concert. The beauty of this plan was its redundancy and its elegance. It didn't rely on a single person. While Revere prepared for his own perilous journey by boat, another rider, William Dawes, was sent by the land route. The lanterns were the backup, the fail-safe. If Revere and Dawes were captured, the signal from the steeple would still get through. It was a brilliant system of checks and balances, ensuring the message would not be lost. It was a silent, visual shout that could travel faster than any horse. On the night of April 18, 1775, the plan was put into action. Revere learned from his sources that the British were preparing their boats. The grenadiers and light infantry were being moved to the edge of the water. The sea route it was. The message was relayed. In the darkness of the Old North Church, Robert Newman, with trembling hands but a steady heart, climbed the 154 steps to the top. He lit 2 lanterns and held them in the highest window for just under a minute, long enough for the observers in Charlestown to see, but not so long as to attract the attention of British patrols below. 2 lights, 2 small flames against the vastness of the night. But for the colonists watching, they were a blazing inferno of urgency. The British were coming by sea. The alarm spread like wildfire. Bells began to ring. Men grabbed their muskets. The rides of Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott began, but it was those 2 simple lanterns that gave them their head start. The signal had worked. It was a testament to the colonists' ingenuity, their courage, and their unshakable commitment to the cause of liberty. It was a simple code, born of necessity, that became a legendary symbol of American defiance. Think about the sheer bravery involved. Robert Newman, alone in that dark steeple, knowing that the fate of the colonies rested, in that moment, on him. Paul Revere, preparing to row right under the nose of the HMS Somerset, a massive British warship. The watchers in Charlestown, straining their eyes in the darkness. Each one was a crucial piece of the puzzle. This wasn't a story of one hero, but of a community united by a common purpose. Their signal plan was more than just a military tactic. It was a declaration. It sent, "We are watching. We are ready. You will not catch us unprepared." And they didn't. The battles of Lexington and Concord were about to begin, all thanks to a simple, secret code and two lights burning brightly in the Boston night. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's these incredible stories of strategy and courage that truly bring history to life. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the signal plan, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter, where the midnight ride truly begins. We love hearing from you, so leave a comment below and let us know what part of this story inspires you the most. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through the American Revolution. Tonight, we stand on the precipice of history in the hushed, anxious hours before the shot heard round the world. This is Chapter 9. The Night Riders Prepare. Imagine Boston, April 18th, 1775. A city under a tense, fragile peace. By day, the cobblestone streets buzz with commerce and the grating presence of British red. But as twilight bleeds into night, a different kind of activity begins. Cloaked in shadows and whispered secrets, the city sleeps, its citizens tucked away in their homes, blissfully unaware that the very ground beneath them is about to tremble with the first footsteps of revolution. In the dimly lit corners of taverns, in the back rooms of workshops, and along the darkened wharves, a network of patriots is stirring. This isn't a grand army mustering on a field. This is a quiet, desperate, and meticulously planned operation. At its heart is a silversmith, a respected artisan, and a devoted son of liberty, Paul Revere. But Revere is not alone. This night belongs to many. Men like William Dawes, a tanner, and Dr. Joseph Warren, a physician who is the linchpin of the Patriot Intelligence Network in Boston. They've received the news they've been dreading and preparing for. British troops are on the move. Their destination is Concord to seize the colonists' cache of weapons and ammunition. Their secondary target is likely Lexington, to capture the Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock. The air is thick with a palpable tension. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant bark of a dog, sends a jolt of adrenaline through these men. This is a race against time, a high-stakes gamble where the cost of failure is not just imprisonment, but the death of an idea, the idea of liberty. Inside a small, candlelit room, Revere and his closest allies huddle over a map. Their faces are etched with concentration. They trace the routes out of Boston. The main roads are watched. The British have patrols everywhere. Getting the word out will require cunning, courage, and a bit of luck. The plan is to Revere will take the more direct, but more dangerous, route by water across the Charles River, then ride hard for Lexington. Dawes will take the longer, land-based route or the Boston Neck. Two riders. Two different paths, to ensure that if one is captured, the message still gets through. It's a brilliant piece of strategic redundancy, born of necessity. Think of the small, personal details of this preparation. Revere isn't just grabbing a horse. He needs to arrange for muffled oars to cross the river silently. A signal to be lit in the old North Church steeple one if, be land too, if by sea, to alert patriots. In Charlestown, he checks his saddle, ensures his boots are sturdy. These are the mundane acts of a man preparing for an extraordinary task. Each action is deliberate, precise, fueled by a quiet urgency that electrifies the still night air. Meanwhile, in other parts of the city, other preparations are underway. A stable boy is quietly told to have a fast horse ready. A woman sews a hidden message into the lining of a coat. A ferryman pretends to be asleep by his boat, awaiting a signal. This is a conspiracy of ordinary people, a tapestry woven from countless threads of individual bravery. They are bakers, blacksmiths, and fishermen, united by a common belief that they will not live under tyranny. The city around them slumbers on. A British officer enjoys a late-night drink, confident that the colonial troublemakers are cowed. A family sleeps soundly, their dreams untroubled by thoughts of war. They are all living in the final moments of an old world. They don't know that, in these clandestine meetings, the future of a nation is being forged. Revere says his goodbyes. We can only imagine the conversation with his wife, Rachel. A hurried embrace, a promise to be careful, a shared look of fear and resolve. He is leaving his family, his home, his business, and stepping into the unknown. He could be captured, or worse, at any moment. Yet, he goes. As Revere makes his way to the waterfront, the city is a labyrinth of shadows. He moves silently, his senses on high alert. The flicker of a lantern, the sound of marching boots, the silhouette of a sentry. Every detail is a potential threat. The fate of the mission rests on his ability to remain unseen, unheard. This wasn't a reckless dash into the night. It was a calculated, nerve-wracking operation, executed by men who understood the immense weight of their actions. They weren't just warning about a troop movement. They were lighting a fuse. They were committing an act of open rebellion against the most powerful empire on Earth. And so, as the clock ticks past 10, the pieces are all in place. Dawes has already slipped past the guards on Boston Neck. Across the river, the signal lanterns are ready in the church steeple, and Paul Revere, standing on the dark shore, looks across the water toward Charlestown, preparing to embark on the ride that will forever etch his name into the annals of American history. The city sleeps, but in the darkness, the revolution is awakening. The night riders are ready, and the world is about to change forever. Thank you for joining me for this chapter. The story of what happens next is one of courage, chaos, and the birth of a legend. If you're enjoying this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring these incredible stories to life. We'll see you next time. Hello history buffs, and welcome back to a deep dive into the American Revolution. Last time, we left off with Paul Revere setting his plan in motion. But who are the brave souls tasked with the riskiest part of the job, climbing the Old North Church steeple? Today, we meet them. Chapter 10. Robert Newman and the Church Sexton. Now, Robert Newman wasn't a soldier or a high-ranking politician. He was the sexton of the Old North Church. Think of him as the caretaker, the groundskeeper, the man who knew every nook and cranny of that historic building. He lived right across the street on Salem Street, and his house is actually still there today. Being the sexton meant he held the keys to the church. Literally, this made him the perfect person for a secret, after-hours mission. Newman was a quiet, unassuming man, but beneath that calm exterior was the heart of a true patriot. He was a member of the Sons of Liberty and was deeply committed to the cause of freedom. He understood the risks. If you were caught by the British, he'd be arrested for treason, a crime punishable by hanging. Yet, he didn't hesitate when asked to play his part. But Newman wouldn't be going up that steeple alone. He needed a lookout and an extra pair of hands. That's where Captain John Pooling Jr. comes in. Pooling was a respected vestryman of the church, that as a member of the church's governing body, and a sea captain by trade. He was also a close friend of Paul Revere and an ardent patriot. As a vestryman, his presence would seem less suspicious if anyone happened to see them near the church late at night. More importantly, he was trustworthy and courageous. Pooling's role was crucial. While Newman prepared the lanterns, Pooling would be the lookout, making sure the coast was clear of British patrols. He was the eyes on the ground before Newman became the eyes in the sky. So, you have these two men from different walks of life, a humble sexton and a respected sea captain, united by a common belief in liberty. Their mission was simple in description, but terrifying in execution. They had to get into the locked church, sneak past any prying eyes, and climb to the very top of the tallest structure in Boston. And they had to do it in the dead of night. The plan was set in motion after Revere met with Dr. Joseph Warren. Revere instructed a third man, whose identity is still debated by some historians, but is often believed to be Pooling or another patriot, to go to the North End and tell Newman to get ready. The message was simple: prepare the lanterns. This was it. The moment they had all been preparing for was finally here. Imagine the scene. It's late on the night of April 18th, 1775. Boston is a city under military occupation, crawling with British soldiers. A curfew is in effect. Anyone caught on the streets could be questioned or arrested. Robert Newman receives the message. His heart must have been pounding. He knew what he had to do. He fetched 2 lanterns and a set of keys. He then met up with Captain Poling. The 2 men likely exchanged a few tense, whispered words, confirming the plan. There was no turning back now. Together, they approached the Old North Church. The familiar building must have looked different that night, silhouetted against the dark sky, its steeple reaching up like a silent finger pointing towards destiny. Every shadow could be hiding a British soldier. Every gust of wind could carry their whispers to the wrong ears. With trembling hands, Newman would have selected the right key and slid it into the heavy lock of the church door. The sound of the lock turning, a simple click, must have sounded like a cannon shot in the stillness of the night. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them, plunging themselves into the pitch-black darkness of the sanctuary. Inside the church, it would have been even more nerve-wracking. The vast, empty space would echo every footstep, every rustle of clothing. They couldn't light a candle for fear the light would be seen through the windows. They had to rely on their memory and their sense of touch to navigate through the rows of pews and towards the back of the church, where the stairs to the belfry were located. The climb itself was a challenge. The steeple stairs of the Old North Church are not a grand staircase. They are narrow, winding, and steep. In total darkness, it would have been treacherous. They were carrying 2 heavy lanterns, which would have been awkward and cumbersome. With each step upwards, they were moving further from safety and closer to their goal, but also closer to being seen. Finally, they reached the belfry, the chamber where the church bells hung. From here, they had to climb another ladder into the very highest part of the steeple, the lantern room. This small room had windows on all sides, offering a panoramic view of Boston, the harbor, and the surrounding countryside. This was their stage. This was where history would be made. Once in the lantern room, the most dangerous part began. They had to light the lanterns, the striking of a flint and steel, the tiny spark, and then the growing flame for a moment. Their faces would be illuminated, making them visible to anyone who might be looking up. And then, the signal itself. 1 lantern, if the British were coming by land. 2, if Bisea. They waited, peering out the window towards the Charles River, waiting for the final confirmation from Revere's messenger on the ground. The signal came. 2 lights. The British were coming by sea. Newman and Poling took the lit lanterns and hung them in the window facing Charlestown. For just under a minute, those 2 pinpricks of light shone out into the darkness. A silent, fiery message. It was a message of warning, a message of defiance, and a message of hope. Across the river, patriots were watching, waiting for this exact moment. Once they saw the 2 lights, they knew the time had come to ride and warn the countryside. The mission was a success. Their job wasn't over, though. They had to extinguish the lanterns, climb back down the treacherous stairs in the dark, and exit the church without being seen. They then had to slip away into the night and pretend like nothing had happened. Robert Newman went home, got into bed, and was later questioned by British soldiers. But he played dumb, and they eventually left him alone. Captain Poling, fearing capture, disguised himself as a sailor and escaped Boston on a fishing boat. Both men risked everything, not for fame or glory, but for the cause they believed in. They were ordinary citizens who did an extraordinary thing, and their courage that night helped ignite the flame of the American Revolution. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. These are the kinds of stories that truly bring history to life. If you enjoyed this, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you and miss our next chapter. We'll be following Paul Revere on his famous midnight ride. See you next time. The old church stood like a stone sentinel against the bruised twilight sky, its belfry a dark finger pointing towards the heavens. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cold stone, damp wood, and the faint, sweet smell of beeswax. I adjusted the oil lamp in my hand, its warm glow pushing back the oppressive shadows that clung to the corners of the narthex. The flame danced, casting our elongated, wavering silhouettes against the ancient walls. Beside me, Poling shifted his weight, the leather of his boots creaking softly on the flagstones. He held a similar lamp, and in the twin pools of light, his face was a mask of grim determination. His knuckles were white where he gripped the lamp's handle. "Ready?" I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. It seemed a sacrilege to speak any louder in this hallowed silence. Pulling just nodded, his eyes fixed on the narrow, spiraling staircase that disappeared into the darkness above us. It was a daunting sight. The stairs were carved from heavy, dark timber, worn, smooth, and concave by centuries of footfalls. They looked less like a staircase, and more like the spine of some long-dead leviathan, coiling up into the guts of the tower. There was no grand invitation here, only a silent, ominous challenge. I took the first step, placing my boot carefully. The wood groaned in protest, a long, low sound that echoed in the cavernous space. It was the sound of old bones settling. I paused, listening, but only the sigh of the wind answered. I ascended another step, and then another. The rhythm of our climb beginning. Left foot, right foot, the creak and groan of the wood a constant, mournful accompaniment. Pulling followed a few steps behind, his breathing steady, a reassuring presence in the gloom. Our lamps threw a moving circle of light around us, illuminating the rough-hewn stone of the tower's interior wall. Patches of dampness glistened like dark tears, and centuries of dust and grime coated every surface. The air grew cooler as we climbed, and the smell of the outdoors began to seep in the briny temps of the sea, carried on a wind that whistled through unseen cracks in the stonework. The staircase was relentless. It spiraled upwards, without a landing, a dizzying corkscrew that seemed to have no end. We fell into a silent, shared cadence. The scrape of our boots, the groan of the wood, the soft hiss of the lamp wicks, and the ever-present moan of the wind. My calf muscles began to burn, a dull ache that spread up my thighs. I focused on the step in front of me, then the next, not daring to look down, nor too far up into the impenetrable blackness. After what felt like an eternity, the narrow stone walls opened up slightly. We had reached a small landing, a midway point where a single, tall window was set into the tower. It was covered by thick wooden shutters, but the wind found its way through the slats, rattling them in their frames. A draft snaked around my ankles, cold and sharp. I held my lamp closer to the window. The smell of oil was stronger here, mingling with the scent of salt and damp wood. Pulling came up beside me, his breathing a little heavier now. "See anything?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I shook my head, not trusting my own voice. I reached out a hand and rested it against the rough wood of the shutters. I could feel the force of the wind vibrating through them. Out there, beyond this stone and wood, was the harbor, a vast expanse of black water under a starless sky. Our destination, our purpose, was tied to that view, but for now, it remained hidden. We didn't linger. The cold was biting, and the feeling of being exposed, even within these thick walls, was unnerving. We turned back to the stairs. The climb resumed, the protest of the ancient wood seeming louder now, more insistent. The air thinned, and each breath felt a little more deliberate, a little more precious. The higher we went, the more the tower seemed to come alive. It was no longer a dead thing of stone and timber, but a breathing entity. We could feel the sway, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement as the wind hammered against the belfry high above. The sounds grew more complex. The whistling through the cracks became a low howl, and we could hear the creak and strain of the massive beams that supported the bells. Finally, our lamps illuminated not another turning step, but a flat, wooden surface above our heads. A trapdoor. We had arrived. I reached the top of the stairs, my head nearly touching the heavy door. I paused, catching my breath, the air tasting of dust and ozone. I looked down at Pulling. In the lamplight, his face was slick with a thin sheen of sweat, his eyes wide and alert. He gave me a slight nod, a silent signal to proceed. I placed my lamp on the top step, freeing both hands. I braced myself and pushed upwards on the trapdoor. It was heavy, heavier than I expected, and for a moment, it didn't budge. I grunted with the effort, my shoulders straining. Then, with a scraping groan of wood on wood, it gave way. I shoved it open, and it fell back onto the belfry floor with a heavy thud that vibrated through the entire structure. A blast of cold, Damp air rushed down, nearly extinguishing our lamps. It was the raw, unfiltered breath of the night, filled with the roar of the wind and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. I shielded the flame of my lamp with my hand, waiting for it to steady. I hauled myself up through the opening, my boots finding purchase on the solid floor of the bell, pulling past his lamp up to me, and then followed, climbing through the hatch with a practiced ease that I envied. We stood together in the heart of the tower. The belfry was a cage of colossal timbers, massive beams, as thick as my body, crisscrossed above our heads, supporting the immense weight of the bells that hung silently in the center of the room. They were monstrous shapes in the gloom, hulking masses of bronze, sleeping giants waiting for a call to action. The room was not entirely enclosed. Great, arched openings on all four sides were fitted with wooden louvers, like the gills of a fish. It was through these that the wind howled, a symphony of shrieks and moans that filled the space with a wild, untamed energy. It tore at our clothes and whipped our hair across our faces. We moved towards the opening that faced the harbor. The wind was strongest here, a physical force pushing against us. We set our lamps down on the floor, behind a thick support beam, where they flickered but held their ground. Peering through the slats, the world opened up below us. The town was a scattering of sleeping squares, its rooftops a dark, textured blanket. The harbor was a vast, restless sheet of black ink. There were no moon or stars. The sky and the sea were one, a seamless void. The only lights were the faint, distant glows from a few ships at anchor, bobbing gently on the unseen swell. It was a view of profound and absolute darkness, both beautiful and terrifying. We were suspended between the sleeping town and the infinite sky, two small figures in a cage of wind and sound. We were utterly alone. Pullen nudged my arm and pointed. I followed his gaze, squinting into the oppressive dark, and then I saw it. Far out, near the mouth of the harbor, a light gleamed. It was small, no bigger than a pinprick, but steady. A lantern. As we watched, another light appeared beside it. Two lanterns, gleaming in the night. The signal. A cold certainty washed over me, colder than the wind. Everything had led to this moment. The hushed conversations, the coded messages, the dangerous journey, and this arduous climb. It all culminated in the sight of those two small flames burning bravely against the immense darkness. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just stood there, watching the lights, the wind howling around us like a mournful chorus. In the heart of the storm, in the belly of the beast, those two small lanterns were a promise, a beacon, a reason. And as we watched them burn, we knew our own vigil had just begun. The climb was over, but the long night was far from finished. Thanks for joining me for this chapter. If you enjoyed this atmospheric journey, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more. Your support means the world and helps me continue creating this content for you. We'll see you in the next one. 0 o'clock to 0:15. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our historical journey. Last time, we left Paul Revere just as he was about to embark on one of the most famous rides in American history. Tonight, we join him on the dark, chilly waters of the Charles River. A moment of suspense where the fate of a revolution hangs in the balance. 0:15 to 1 o'clock. Picture this. It's the night of April 18th, 1775. The moon is just a sliver in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the water. Revere is in a small rowboat, muffled oars dipping silently into the Charles. He's not alone. Two friends, Joshua Bentley and Thomas Richardson, are rowing with quiet urgency. Every splash, every creak of the oarlocks feels deafening in the stillness. Why the secrecy? Because just a stone's throw away, anchored in the harbor, is the HMS Somerset, a massive British man. Its dark silhouette, a constant, menacing presence. Getting caught means the end of the mission, and likely the end of Paul Revere. La uno, y 45 Revere's heart is pounding. He knows the plan. He's a key part of it, but so much is out of his control. He had arranged a backup signal with his friend, Robert Newman, the sexton of the Old North Church. One lantern in the steeple if the British regulars were marching out by land. Over the Boston Neck, 2 lanterns if they were coming by sea, taking boats across the Back Bay. This signal wasn't for him, but for the Sons of Liberty in Charlestown, on the other side of the river. But as he sits in that boat, straining his eyes in the darkness, he can't help but look back at the Boston skyline. He needs to know. His entire ride depends on it. 1:45 to 2:30, he scans the horizon, his gaze fixed on the tallest point in the north end, the steeple of the Old North Church. It's a familiar landmark, a symbol of home. But tonight it's a beacon of vital intelligence. For a few agonizing moments, there's nothing but darkness. Had the message been missed? Was something wrong? The boat continues its silent glide, moving further from Boston and closer to the Charlestown shore. Every second feels like an eternity. The tension in that small boat must have been thick enough to cut with a knife. 2:30 to 3:15, and then he sees it. A flicker, a tiny pinprick of light, high up in the bill. Revere holds his breath. Is it just a stray candle from a window? A trick of the moonlight? He squints, his eyes watering from the strain and the cold night air. The light wavers for a second, and then another one appears right next to it. 2 distinct, unmistakable points of light, glowing like defiant stars against the blackness of the occupied city. There's no doubt. 2 lanterns. 3:15 to 4 o'clock, a wave of certainty. A cold, clear understanding washes over him. It's happening. The British aren't taking the long way around. Tiree, coming by sea. They would be embarking from the foot of the Boston Common, crossing the water to land at Phipps's farm in Cambridge. This route was faster, more direct. It meant they would be on the road to Lexington and Concord much sooner. The urgency of his mission just multiplied tenfold. The militia would have less time to prepare. Every minute was now precious. 4 o'clock to 4:45, that signal wasn't just information. It was a confirmation of his worst fears and a catalyst for his heroic actions. As his boat finally scrapes against the muddy bank of the Charlestown shore, Revere is no longer just a messenger. He is the embodiment of the alarm itself. He scrambles ashore, his mind already racing, planning his route. He knows that waiting for him is a horse named Brown Beauty, ready to carry him on his desperate ride into the countryside. The 2 lanterns behind him are a stark reminder of the looming threat, pushing him forward. The image of those 2 lights gleaming from the church steeple has become an iconic symbol of the American Revolution. It represents courage, ingenuity, and the power of a few dedicated individuals working together in secret. It was a simple plan, executed under immense pressure, that set in motion a chain of events that would change the world forever. For Paul Revere, crossing the Charles River, those 2 lanterns weren't just a signal. They were the starting gun for the race to freedom. 5:30 to 6 o'clock. In that moment, everything crystallized. The whispers in taverns, the secret meetings, the stockpiling of supplicit, all led to this. 2 lights in a church tower, a man in a boat, and a horse waiting on the opposite shore. A simple, elegant, and incredibly brave act of defiance. The British were coming, and thanks to that signal, Paul Revere was ready to ride and sound the alarm. 6 o'clock to 6:45 now, safely in Charlestown. Revere connects with Colonel Conant and other patriots. They'd seen the signal to "They're coming by sea," he confirms, the words heavy with implication. They provide him with his mount, a sturdy, fast horse, loaned by Deacon John Larkin. As he swings into the saddle, he takes one last look back across the river. The lights are gone now, their job done. His job was just beginning. He turns his horse towards a dark, sleeping countryside, towards Lexington. The midnight ride has officially begun. 6:45 to 7:30, the British forces, at this very moment, are boarding their boats. Hundreds of elite grenadiers and light infantry, their faces grim, their muskets loaded. They believe their mission is a secret, a swift strike to seize the rebel supplies and arrest their leaders. They have no idea that a lone silversmith is about to outpace them, carrying the wind of warning ahead of their advance. The race is home, and the future of a nation rides with Paul Revere. 7:30 to 8:15. Think about the sheer bravery of Robert Newman, who climbed those dark, rickety stairs in the steeple, knowing that if he were caught, he would be charged with treason. Think about the rowers risking their lives to get Revere across the river under the nose of a British warship. This was a collective effort, a network of ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things. Revere was the one who rowed, but he rode on a wave of collaborative courage. 8:15 to 9 o'clock. That Cigna, seen by Revere on the water, confirmed the intelligence he already carried, but it also lit a fire in him. It was the visual proof, the undeniable call to action. From this point forward, there was no hesitation. His path was clear, AAD to ride, and ride fast. He had to wake up the countryside. He had to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington that they were specific targets. The fate of the revolution was literally in his hands. 9 o'clock to 9:30, and so, with the image of 2 lanterns burned into his memory, Paul Revere spurred his horse into the night. The sound of hooves striking the dirt road echoed the beating of a revolutionary heart, a sound that would soon be joined by the ringing of church bells and the firing of muskets across the Massachusetts landscape. The cry, "The British are coming," was about to become a legend. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter of the story. The sight of those lanterns is such a powerful moment, isn't it? In our next video, we will ride alongside Revere as he gallops through the villages of Medford, Menotomy, and finally into Lexington, spreading the alarm. It's a ride fraught with danger, including a close call with British patrols. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and do you forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you miss the next part of our journey. Imagine the world asleep, bathed in the soft, silver glow of a full moon. It's April 18th, 1775. The air is still, the night is quiet, but a storm is brewing. A storm that will change the course of history forever. And at the heart of this approaching storm is one man on one horse, with a message that will ignite a revolution. This is the story of Paul Revere's midnight ride. Tonight, we're journeying back in time, riding alongside Revere as he embarks on his legendary mission. This isn't just a tale from a history book. It's a gripping story of courage, urgency, and the power of a single voice in the darkness. We'll explore the moments just after he slips past British patrols in Boston, his heart pounding in rhythm with his horse's hooves on the dirt road. The journey begins. Revere isn't shouting from the rooftops as many paintings might suggest. The reality was far more dangerous, far more subtle. His mission depended on stealth. As he galloped through the sleeping countryside, past shadowed farmhouses and silent villages, his warning was a tense whisper, a carefully delivered secret passed from one patriot to the next. His first stop after leaving Charlestown was the town of Medford. Here, he met with Captain Isaac Hull, the leader of the local Minutemen. Can you picture it? A lone rider appearing out of the darkness, his horse breathing hard. He doesn't dismount for long. "The regulars are coming out," he'd say, his voice low but firm. The message was clear. The British Army was on the move, marching from Boston, their destination believed to be Concord, where the colonists had stashed their weapons and ammunition. This wasn't just a single message. It was the start of a chain reaction. After warning Captain Hull, Revere spurred his horse on. Every farm he passed, every light he saw in a window, was a potential ally. He would pull up, his voice carrying just enough to wake the household. "The British are coming." A simple phrase, yet it carried the weight of a nation's future. It was a call to arms, a plea for vigilance, a spark in the powder keg of colonial tension. Think about the courage this took. The roads were patrolled by British officers. At any moment, a redcoat patrol could emerge from the shadows. Capture meant imprisonment, or worse. Yet Revere rode on, his resolve hardened by the moonlight. He knew that the fate of the Colonial militia in Lexington and Concord rested on his speed and his ability to spread the word before the British arrived. As he rode, the network of alarm began to work. From Medford, the message spread like wildfire. Other riders were dispatched. Church bells began to toll in the distance, their chimes echoing Revere's warning across the fields and hills. What started as a whisper was growing into a roar. The countryside was waking up. Farmers grabbed their muskets, Minutemen assembled in town squares, and the quiet night was filled with the anxious energy of preparation. Revere's route was a testament to his knowledge of the land. He wasn't just following the main road. He knew the back ways, the shortcuts, the paths that would keep him hidden. His journey was a race against time, a desperate dash to stay ahead of the advancing British column. He rode through what is now Somerville, Arlington, and on towards Lexington, each hoofbeat a drumbeat for freedom. It's fascinating to consider that the famous phrase, "The British are coming," might not be exactly what he said. Many historians believe he was more specific, saying the regulars are coming out. This was to avoid confusion, as many colonists still consider themselves British. It was a crucial distinction. It wasn't a foreign enemy, but their own government's army, coming to disarm them. This subtle difference speaks volumes about the complex feelings of the time. As Revere approached Lexington, his mission reached a critical point. Lexington was where two prominent revolutionary leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, were staying. The British had orders to capture them. Revere's warning wasn't just about protecting military supplies. It was about saving the very architects of the revolution. The stakes could not have been higher. Imagine the scene as he finally galloped into Lexington. The town was dark, but his arrival shattered the peace. He found the house where Adams and Hancock were lodging and delivered his urgent news. His breathless report confirmed their worst fears. The British were not just coming, they were coming in force. Thanks to Revere, they had time to escape, to continue leading the cause. But Revere's ride wasn't over. Joined by another rider, William Doss, who had taken a different route, and later by Dr. Samuel Prescott, he pressed on toward Colonial. The trio became a team, determined to ensure the alarm reached its final destination. Their shared purpose under the moonlit sky is a powerful image of unity in the face of tyranny. This chapter of American history, the beginning of the Midnight Ride, is more than just a horse and a rider. It's about the transfer of information in a time before telephones or internet. It's about the bravery of one person willing to risk everything for an idea. Paul Revere's whispered warnings, carried on the night air, became the shout that awoke a nation. His ride reminds us that sometimes the quietest actions can have the loudest impact on history. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey tonight. If you found this story as captivating as I do, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. April 19th, 1775. The air in Massachusetts is thick with tension, a silence that's about to be shattered forever. Just hours before, 2 lanterns had gleamed from the steeple of Boston's Old North Church. 2, if by sea. Paul Revere and William Dawes had galloped through the night, their urgent cries echoing through sleeping towns. The regulars are coming out. Their warning, a desperate race against time, reached Lexington just before the British regulars, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and rose. A small band of about 80 colonial militiamen, farmers and shopkeepers mostly, assembled on Lexington Green. They were led by Captain John Parker, a veteran of the French and Indian War. He knew his men were outnumbered and outmatched by the approaching force of over 700 British soldiers, but they stood firm, not to start a war, but to make a stand for their rights. As the scarlet-coated British column marched into view, their discipline was a stark contrast to the Minutemen's rugged formation. Major Jean Pitcairn, leading the British advance, rode forward and ordered the colonists to disperse. "Lay down your arms, you villains, you rebels." Suited. Captain Parker, seeing the impossible odds, gave the order to his men. "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." What happened next is shrouded in the fog of war and conflicting accounts. A single shot rang out. To this day, no one knows for sure who fired it. Was it a nervous militiaman, a jumpy British soldier, or a shot from a bystander behind a stone wall? It doesn't matter. That one shot, the shot heard round the world, was the spark. Instantly, the British lines erupted in a volley of musket fire. The green was engulfed in a cloud of acrid, white smoke. When it cleared, 8 Minutemen lay dead or dying, and 10 more were wounded. The colonists, overwhelmed, scattered, and retreated. The British regulars, having asserted their authority, let out a cheer and fired a victory volley before reforming their column and marching on toward their next objective. Concord! Their mission was to seize and destroy a cache of colonial military supplies rumored to be hidden there. But the ride of Revere, Dawes, and another rider, Samuel Prescott, had done its job. As the British marched the 6 miles from Lexington to Concord, the countryside was buzzing like an angry beehive. Militiamen from surrounding towns were grabbing their muskets and converging on the path the British would have to take. When the British arrived in Concord, they found most of the military stores had already been moved and hidden. They split up to search the town, setting fire to a few cannon carriages and other supplies they did find. From a hill overlooking the town, the gathering colonial militia saw the smoke rising. Believing the British were burning their homes, their resolve hardened. Hundreds of militiamen now advanced toward the North Bridge, which was being held by a small contingent of British soldiers. This time, the colonists were the ones with the numerical advantage. As they approached the bridge, the British fired a warning volley, then another that struck and killed Captain Isaac Davis. And another Major John Buttrick of the Concord militia famously yelled, "Fire, fellow soldiers! For God's sake, fire!" And they did. The colonists unleashed a disciplined volley that sent the British regulars reeling, outnumbered and stunned by the colonists' resolve. The British soldiers broke ranks and fled back to the main force in town. It was a shocking and humiliating retreat for the world's most powerful army. The battle at the North Bridge was a turning point. It proved to the colonists that they could stand up to the British regulars in a direct confrontation and win. The British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, realized his position was becoming untenable. The entire countryside was now armed and descending upon him. He gave the order to retreat back to Boston. What followed was not a retreat, but a grueling 16-mile running battle. The road from Concord back to Boston became a deadly gauntlet. Thousands of militiamen, using what we now call guerrilla tactics, took cover behind stone walls, trees, and buildings, firing on the exposed column of British soldiers. The Redcoats, trained for open field battles, were completely unprepared for this kind of fighting. They were being picked off, one by one, their bright red uniforms making them easy targets. The British march became a desperate flight. Panic and exhaustion set in. Ammunition ran low. The orderly column disintegrated into a frantic mob. One British officer later wrote, "We were totally surrounded with such an incessant fire as it's impossible to conceive. Our ammunition was likely to fail. It seemed the entire force was on the verge of being annihilated, just as all seemed lost for the British. A relief force of 1,000 men under the command of Lord Percy met them just outside Lexington. With cannons and fresh troops, Percy was able to provide covering fire and create a perimeter, allowing the battered survivors of the Concord March to rest. But the respite was brief. As they resumed their retreat to Boston, the attacks continued all the way to Charlestown, just across the river from the city. By the time the sun set on April 19th, the British had suffered nearly 300 casualties, while the colonists had fewer than 100. The day had begun with a show of British force and ended in a near disaster for them. The news of the battle spread like wildfire throughout the colonies. It was a profound psychological victory for the Americans. They had faced the might of the British Empire and had not only held their ground but had driven them back. The first shots at Lexington and Concord were more than just the start of a battle. They were the start of a nation. The smoke that rose from the muskets on Lexington Green and the North Bridge signaled the end of debate and the beginning of the American Revolution. The farmers and shopkeepers who stood their ground that day had ignited a fire for liberty that would eventually forge the United States of America. Within days, thousands of militia from all over New England surrounded Boston, trapping the British Army in the city. The siege of Boston had begun. The war was on. The clash of ideologies had become a clash of arms, and there was no turning back. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome back to our series on the American Revolution. Today, we're diving into the shadows of history, into a story of whispered accusations and hidden truths. Our focus, the iconic Old North Church in Boston. We all know the story of 1, if by land, and 2, if by sea. But what happened, asterisk? After asterisk, those fateful lanterns were hung. What happened after the shots at Lexington and Concord echoed through the colonies? For the Old North Church, the battle was far from over. It had just begun, and it wasn't a battle fought with muskets, but with rumors, suspicion, and intense political pressure. In the immediate aftermath of April 19, 1775, Boston was a city under siege, a pressure cooker of fear and paranoia. British forces, reeling from their retreat, were looking for someone to blame, and their eyes, filled with suspicion, fell squarely upon the tallest steeple in the North End, the Old North Church. Think about it from their perspective. The rebels had been warned. Someone had signaled them. Those lanterns, visible for miles, were a clear act of coordination with the enemy. And where did that signal originate? From the belfry of a prominent Anglican church, a church that was supposed to be a bastion of loyalty to the king. To the British and the Loyalists who remained in Boston, this wasn't just a strategic setback. It was an act of profound betrayal. Suddenly, the church was no longer just a place of worship. It became a crime scene. Accusations flew. Loyalists, neighbors who had once shared pews with patriots, now pointed fingers. They whispered in taverns and testified to British officers that the church was a nest of sedition. They claimed its clergy and vestry must have been complicit, that they had knowingly aided the rebels in their treasonous plot. Imagine the immense pressure on the church's rector, Reverend Mather Byles Jr. He was an Anglican priest, sworn to uphold the Church of England and, by extension, the authority of King George III. Yet his congregation was a mix of loyalists and patriots. His sexton, Robert Newman, was a known patriot. He was caught between his duty to the crown and the sympathies of many of his flock. Not to mention the very real threat of British military authority breathing down his neck. The church's leadership found themselves in an impossible position. To admit knowledge of the lanterns would be to sign their own death warrants for treason. To deny it convincingly was nearly impossible, given the circumstances. So, what did they do? They did what people have done for centuries when faced with a dangerous truth, debris italiano. A wall of silence went up around the Old North Church. When questioned by British authorities, the clergy and vestry feigned ignorance. They expressed shock and outrage that their sacred space could have been used for such a nefarious purpose. They likely claimed that some rebel sympathizer must have snuck in, using the church without their knowledge or consent. It was a plausible story, but one that was paper-thin. Robert Newman, the man who actually hung the lanterns, was arrested and interrogated, but he held firm, refusing to implicate anyone else. Captain John Pullen Jr., the vestryman who arranged for the signal, managed to escape Boston, disguised as a fisherman, his silence assured by his absence. Paul Revere himself was far away, his part in the story not yet widely known. The truth of that night was deliberately fractured and hidden. Each person involved held only a piece of the puzzle, and they kept that piece locked away. For the people of the Old North Church, survival depended on this collective secrecy. They had to maintain their loyalty to the crown, at least on the surface, while the city remained under British occupation. For years, the official story was one of ignorance. The church presented itself as a victim, its property misused by shadowy rebels. This carefully constructed narrative allowed the institution to survive the occupation. It protected its clergy and its congregation from retribution, but the suspicion never truly went away. For the remainder of the siege of Boston, the church was watched. Its services were likely monitored, its clergy's sermons scrutinized for any hint of rebellious sentiment. The trust between the church and the ruling authorities was shattered. It wasn't until long after the war, after a new nation was born, that the pieces of the story began to emerge. Decades later, historians and descendants started to piece together the oral histories, letters, and diaries. Paul Revere himself, in a 1798 letter, finally detailed his side of the story, confirming the plan for the lantern signals. Even then, the full involvement of the church's leadership remained murky. Did the rector know? Did the entire vestry approve? Or was it a small, clandestine group of patriots within the church, acting on their own? The silence had been so effective, so complete, that it left gaps in the historical record that we still debate today. This chapter of the Old North Church's history is a powerful lesson in the complexities of revolution. It wasn't always about grand battles and heroic charges. Sometimes, it was about quiet defiance, calculated risks, and the courage to keep a secret. It was about navigating the treacherous gray areas between loyalty and rebellion, where a single misplaced word could lead to the gallows. The story of the church under suspicion reveals that the fight for independence was also a battle of information, a war of whispers and secrets. The lanterns in the belfry were not just a signal. They were an act of faith, and it caused faith in each other, and faith that the truth, however long it was buried, would eventually shine as brightly as the lights that sparked a revolution. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into a lesser-known part of our history. If you enjoyed this, please give this video a like, and don't even forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories hidden in the shadows of the past. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through history. Today, in our final chapter, Echoes Through the Centuries, we reflect on how a simple church became an enduring monument to freedom. Imagine standing here, centuries ago. The air is thick with tension, the future uncertain. Then, high in the darkness of the steeple, a light appears, and then another. Two faint glows, cutting through the night, one if by land, two if by sea. It was more than just a signal. It was the spark that ignited a revolution. The moment a group of determined individuals decided that liberty was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Those two lanterns in the Old North Church steeple were UN just for Paul Revere and the riders waiting across the river. They were a message for the future, a message for us. They declared that in the face of tyranny, ordinary people could do extraordinary things. They symbolized hope, courage, and the defiant spirit of a nation about to be born. For generations, this church has been more than just a place of worship. It's become a pilgrimage site for patriots, a classroom for students, and a sacred space for anyone who cherishes freedom. When you walk through these doors, you're not just entering a historic building, you're stepping into a story that is still being written. The worn pews have held countless souls, each contemplating the price of liberty. The cool air seems to whisper tales of secret meetings and brave decisions made in the dead of night. Think about the countless visitors who have stood right where you are, gazing up at that steeple. They came from all corners of the globe, from every walk of life. Soldiers heading off to war, seeking a reminder of what they were fighting for. School children on a field trip, their eyes wide with wonder as they connect with a pivotal moment in their nation's past. Immigrants, newly arrived, looking for the tangible roots of the American dream. Each person brings their own hopes, their own struggles, their own understanding of freedom to this place. And as they stand here, they all imagine the same thing. The flicker of those two lanterns against the vast, dark sky. They try to feel the chill of that April night, the mix of fear and exhilaration that must have filled the air. They connect with the sexton, Robert Newman, who climbed those creaking stairs, knowing the immense risk he was taking. His act of quiet courage is a powerful reminder that history is not only shaped by famous generals and politicians, but by everyday people who choose to act. This steeple doesn't just pierce the Boston skyline. It pierces time itself. It's a direct link, a physical connection, to the very moment the fight for American independence began in earnest. The echoes of that night resonate through the centuries, reminding us that freedom isn't a given. It's a torch that must be passed from one generation to the next. Those lanterns were the initial flame, and it's our responsibility to keep that flame burning brightly. The story of this church teaches us that symbols matter. A steeple, a bell, a pair of lantern's are not just inanimate objects. They are vessels of memory, imbued with the spirit of the people and the ideals they fought for. They anchor us to our past and guide us toward our future. They remind us that the struggle for liberty is a continuous journey, not a final destination. In later years, as the nation grew and faced new challenges, civil war, world wars, civil rights movements, this church stood as a silent witness. Its presence was a constant reminder of the country's founding principles. It became a touchstone, a place to return to remember the initial promise of a government of the people. By the people, for the people. The glow of those lanterns represents the light of an idea, idea that people have the right to self-determinate. It's an idea that has inspired movements for freedom around the world. When visitors from other countries stand here, they don't just see a piece of American history. They see a universal symbol of hope against oppression. They see proof that a small act of defiance can change the course of history. Today, as we look up at that steeple, we are part of that long line of visitors. We carry our own modern-day concerns, our own questions about the future. But for a moment, we can stand in the shoes of those who came before us. We can feel the weight of their legacy and the power of their example. We can let the story of those two lanterns inspire us to be vigilant guardians of our own liberties. The church's transformation from a local parish to a national monument wasn't planned. It happened organically, through the power of a single, resonant story. It's a testament to how history lives, not just in books, but in places, in objects, and in the collective memory of a people. The echos of 1775 are not faint whispers. They are a clarion call that still rings out today. So the next time you see an image of this steeple, don't just see a historic landmark. See a beacon. Remember the darkness it defied and the light it heralded. Let it remind you of the courage it takes to stand up for what you believe in, and the incredible power of a simple, clear message of hope. This is more than a story of a church. It's the story of how an ideal, lit by two small lanterns, became the foundation of a nation and an inspiration to the world. Thank you for joining me on this incredible, historical journey. The story of our past is the key to our future. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. We'll see you next time. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere"? Of course, you have. It's one of the most famous opening lines in American poetry. But what if I told you that the poem that made Paul Revere a household name is, well, not entirely accurate? Today, we're diving into the fascinating story behind Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's 1860 masterpiece, Paul Revere's Ride, and exploring how this single poem transformed a historical event into an enduring American legend. We'll uncover how Longfellow, writing on the eve of the Civil War, took the true story of a midnight messenger and shaped it into a powerful symbol of American courage and unity. So, saddle up, because we are about to take a ride through history and poetry to see how the legend of Paul Revere was truly born. Before we get to the poem itself, let's set the stage. The year is 1860. The United States is a nation on the brink, teetering on the edge of a catastrophic civil war. The very idea of the Union is under threat. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of America's most beloved poets, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, is watching this national crisis unfold. He's a man who deeply values history, family, and the founding ideals of the nation. He feels a growing urgency to remind his fellow Americans of the shared sacrifices that created their country in the first place. He's looking for a story, a hero, a symbol that can cut through the political division and inspire a sense of collective patriotism. And he finds it in a half-forgotten tale from the American Revolution, a story of a Boston silversmith's daring ride. Paul Revere, in his own time, was certainly a respected patriot and a key figure in Boston's revolutionary circles. But he wasn't the singular hero that we often imagine him to be today. In fact, after his famous ride in April 1775, his story largely faded from public memory. He was one of many messengers that night. People knew about the battles of Lexington and Concord, but the specifics of who warned whom had become muddled over time. Revere himself wrote down his account of the ride, but it wasn't widely circulated. For nearly a century, he was just one name among many in the annals of the Revolution. That is, until Longfellow decided to pick up his pen. So, why Paul Revere? Longfellow was a masterful storyteller, and he knew a good story when he saw one. The tale had all the right ingredients: a looming threat, a secret signal, a lone hero riding against time, and a nation's fate hanging in the balance. The image of the two lanterns in the Old North Church, one, if by land, and two, if by sea, was pure, poetic gold. It was simple, dramatic, and incredibly memorable. Longfellow wasn't trying to write a dry, factual history textbook. He was crafting a national myth, a ballad that would be easy for children to memorize and for adults to recite. He wanted to create an icon. Longfellow took the basic facts of Revere's ride and polished them, streamlined them, and added a healthy dose of artistic license. For example, in the poem, Revere waits anxiously on the opposite shore for the signal from the Old North Church. In reality, he had already arranged a signal as a backup plan in case he couldn't get out of Boston himself. The poem also conveniently leaves out the other writers, William Dawes and Samuel Prescott. Why? Because a single, solitary hero makes for a much more powerful and dramatic narrative. It's the midnight ride of Paul Revere, not the midnight rides of Revere, Dawes, and Prescott. It just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Longfellow's goal wasn't historical precision. It was emotional impact. He was forging a symbol of individual action sparking a collective uprising, and the timing of the poem's publication was absolutely crucial. Published in the Atlantic Monthly in December 1860, and then as the opening piece of his 1863 collection Tales of a Wayside Inn, the poem landed like a thunderclap in a nation tearing itself apart. As states began to secede from the Union, Longfellow's words offered a stirring reminder of a time when Americans from different colonies united against a common foe. The poem's message was clear. Look at what we achieved when we stood together. The hurry of hoofs in a village street, the shape in the moonlight, the word that shall echo forevermore. It was a call to remember the nation's shared origins and the courage it took to build it. It was a plea for unity, disguised as a children's poem. The impact was immediate and profound. Paul Revere's Ride became one of the most popular and widely recited poems in American history. Schoolchildren across the country memorized its galloping rhythm and vivid imagery. It did more than just tell a story. It created an experience. You can almost feel the horses gallop in the poem's meter. The famous, "Anapiste, listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." That rhythm mimics a horse as he gallop, pidadadun. It's a work of genius that makes the poem incredibly exciting to read aloud. Through this poem, Longfellow single-handedly elevated Paul Revere from a historical footnote to an American folk hero of the highest order. And what about the Old North Church? Before Longfellow's poem, it was just one of many historic churches in Boston. But the poem immortalized it. The line, a glimmer, and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. That imagery is seared into the American consciousness. Suddenly, the church wasn't just a building. It was the silent co-conspirator in the birth of a nation. Tourists began flocking to see the belfry where the famous signal was hung. The poem turned the church into a pilgrimage site, a tangible link to this legendary moment. To this day, the Old North Church's identity is inextricably linked to Longfellow's poem, a testament to the power of a single work of art to shape our perception of history. So, while historians might quibble with the details, and rightly so, they can't deny the poem's cultural power. Longfellow wasn't lying. He was myth-making. He understood that nations need more than just facts and dates. They need stories, heroes, and legends to bind them together. He took the raw material of history and crafted a narrative that resonated with the soul of a nation in crisis. He gave America a hero at the exact moment it needed one most. The poem is a reminder that the way we tell stories about our past is just as important as the past itself. It shapes our identity, our values, and our understanding of who we are. In the end, the story of Paul Revere's Ride is a story about storytelling itself. It shows how a poet, armed with nothing more than words and a powerful idea, could reach back in time, pluck a man from relative obscurity, and place him forever in the pantheon of American heroes. The Paul Revere we know today is as much a creation of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow as he is a product of the American Revolution, and the legend he created continues to echo, a cry of defiance and not of fear, reminding us of the power of a single voice in the dark. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history and poetry. It's a fascinating example of how our national memory is built. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Start a video. Hello and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, in Chapter 18, we redelving into a story of resilience and dedication. The preservation and restoration of a truly special place. We're talking about how a beloved church, a silent witness to generations of life, was saved from the brink and lovingly brought back to its former glory. This isn't just a story about bricks and mortar. It's about a community's fight to protect its heart and soul. Imagine this building, weathered by time, its stones holding memories of weddings, baptisms, and quiet moments of reflection. For centuries, it stood strong, but time, as it does, began to take its toll. The roof leaked, the stonework crumbled, and the beautiful stained glass windows grew dull and fragile. There was a real danger that this historic landmark, this place of worship and remembrance, could be lost forever. It was a heartbreaking thought for everyone whose lives had been touched by its presence. But a community is more than just a collection of individuals. It's a force. And this community refused to let its history fade away. The first step in this monumental task was recognition. A campaign was launched to have the church officially designated as a historic landmark. This was crucial. It wasn't just about getting a fancy plaque. It was about securing legal protection that would shield the church from demolition or neglect. It was a declaration that this building mattered, that its stories were worth preserving for future generations. The campaign was a massive grassroots effort. People shared their personal stories connected to the church. Their grandparents were married here. They were christened in this font. They found solace within these walls during difficult times. These weren't just anecdotes. They were powerful testimonies that built a compelling case. Petitions were signed, letters were written, and local leaders were lobbied. The passion was undeniable. And finally, the effort paid off. The church was officially recognized as a protected historic landmark. A huge victory, but it was just the beginning of the journey. Now came the even bigger challenge: restoration. The goal wasn't to make the church look brand new, but to honor its history while ensuring its survival. This required a delicate touch and incredible expertise. A team of conservation specialists, architects, and historians was assembled. Their first task was a meticulous assessment, like a doctor examining a patient. They analyzed every inch of the building, from the foundations deep in the earth to the tip of the steeple reaching for the sky. They identified areas of decay, structural weaknesses, and historical features that needed careful attention. This diagnostic phase was fascinating. Using modern technology like laser scanning and ground-penetrating radar, they uncovered secrets the church had held for centuries. They discovered original paint colors hidden beneath layers of modern paint, and found construction techniques that spoke volumes about the original builder's ingenuity. This deep understanding was essential. It ensured that the restoration would be authentic, respecting the materials and methods of the past. It was a dialogue with the original craftsmen across the centuries. With a detailed plan in place, the physical work began. This was a masterclass in traditional craftsmanship. Stonemasons, skilled in techniques passed down through generations, carefully replaced eroded stones, carving new ones to match the originals perfectly. Carpenters worked on the ancient roof timbers, reinforcing the structure while preserving as much of the original wood as possible. It was slow, painstaking work. Each hammer blow, each chisel mark, was a testament to their dedication. One of the most breathtaking aspects of the restoration was the stained glass. Over the years, the lead cames holding the glass pieces had weakened, and the glass itself was covered in a century of grime. Each window was carefully removed, piece by piece, like a giant, fragile puzzle. In the workshop, artisans cleaned each fragment of glass, revealing vibrant colors that hadn't been seen in decades. They repaired cracks with an almost invisible touch and re-leaded the panels, giving them strength for another 100 years. When the windows were reinstalled, light streamed through them once more, painting the interior with jewel-toned light. It was as if the soul of the church was reawakening. The restoration wasn't just about the grand gestures. It was also about the small details. The worn wooden pews were carefully refinished. The intricate carvings on the pulpit were cleaned and restored, and even the old iron door hinges were painstakingly conserved. Every element was treated with respect, recognizing that each piece contributed to the building's unique character and story. This commitment to detail is what separates a good restoration from a great one. Funding this massive undertaking was, as you can imagine, a monumental challenge in itself. The community once again rallied. Bake sales, concerts, and fundraising dinners were held. Local businesses donated materials and services. Grants were sought from historical preservation societies and heritage foundations. People from all walks of life contributed what they could, whether it was a few dollars or a few hours of their time volunteering. It created an incredible sense of shared ownership. This wasn't just the church. It became our church in a way it had never been before. This collective effort fostered a powerful sense of community spirit. People who had never met before found themselves working side by side, united by a common goal. It strengthened old bonds and forged new ones. The process of saving the building also saved something intangible within the community itself. It was a reminder of what they could achieve when they came together. Today, the church stands not as a relic of the past, but as a living, breathing part of the community. It is a testament to what can be achieved when people care enough to act. The restoration ensured that it could continue its original purpose as a place of worship. Its bells still ringing out, calling people to gather. But its role has also expanded. It's now a center for the community, hosting concerts, art exhibitions, and historical talks. It has become a place where people connect not only with their faith, but with their shared heritage and with each other. The church is more than just a beautiful building. It is a landmark of remembrance. It reminds us of the generations who came before, of the community's resilience, and of the importance of preserving our history. It stands as a symbol of hope and continuity, a bridge connecting the past, the present, and the future. The story of its preservation and restoration is a powerful lesson in stewardship, a reminder that we are all temporary custodians of the treasures we inherit, with a responsibility to protect them for those who will follow. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible story of restoration and community spirit. It's a powerful example of how we can protect the places that define us. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear about a historic place that's special to you in the comments below. Until next time, take care. Step back in time with me, but not too far back. Let's travel to the present day, to Boston's historic North End. Here, amidst the charming cobblestone streets and the aroma of Italian bakeries, stands a silent sentinel of American history, the Old North Church. Officially known as Christ Church in the city of Boston, this iconic landmark isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living, breathing part of the city today. As you approach, the first thing that strikes you is its elegant simplicity. The red brick facade, weathered by nearly 3 centuries of New England seasons, glows warmly in the sunlight. Its famous steeple, the one that held those 2 fateful lanterns, soars towards the sky. A beacon not just for ships in the harbor, but for all who seek a connection to America's foundational story. It has been rebuilt twice after being toppled by hurricanes, a testament to the resilience of both the structure and the community it serves. But the real magic begins when you step through its doors. The air inside feels different, hushed, reverent, and thick with the weight of history. Your eyes are immediately drawn to the clean, white interior and the gracefully ascending galleries. Sunlight streams through the large, clear glass windows, illuminating the space with a gentle, natural light that feels both historic and timeless. Look at these box pews. They're quite unique, aren't they? Back in the 18th century, families would rent or purchase these pews. They were a sign of status, and families would often decorate them to their own tastes. You can almost imagine the families of colonial Boston merchants, artisans, and patriots sitting right here, listening to sermons, their whispers and prayers absorbed by the very wood that surrounds you. Each pew has its own little door, a charming detail that speaks to a different era. Notice the plaques on some of them, indicating the notable families who once called this their spiritual home. Now, cast your gaze upward. The beautiful chandeliers, or branches as they were called, are magnificent. The one you see hanging in the center was a gift from a sea captain in 1724. It was first lit on Christmas Day of that year, and it has been a centerpiece of the church's services ever since. Imagine the sanctuary illuminated by candlelight, the flickering flames dancing across the faces of the congregation as they gathered for worship on a cold winter-esque night. It's a powerful image that connects us directly to the past. Of course, no visit to the Old North Church is complete without acknowledging its most famous moment. On the night of April 18, 1775, church sexton Robert Newman and Captain John Pooling, Jr. climbed this very steeple. They hung 2 lanterns. A signal arranged by Paul Revere to warn patriots in Charlestown that the British troops were advancing by sea across the Charles River. 1 if by land, and 2 if by sea. That simple phrase, immortalized by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, echoes in the minds of every visitor who stands here. It was a moment of incredible bravery, a spark that helped ignite the flame of the American Revolution. But the church is more than just a monument to a single historical event. It has been an active Episcopal congregation for nearly 300 years. Services are still held here every Sunday. The organ, a magnificent instrument that has filled this space with music for generations, still plays. Prayers are still offered. Hymns are still sung. And the community still gathers within these historic walls. This continuity is what makes the Old North Church so special. It's not a museum frozen in time. It's a place of active faith and community, where the traditions of the past inform the life of the present. Let's venture down into the crypt. Beneath the floor of the church lies a space that holds an estimated 1,100 burials. It's a somber but fascinating glimpse into the lives and deaths of early from the church's first rector, Dr. Timothy Cutler, 2 British soldiers who died during the Battle of Bunker Hill. Exploring this space is a poignant reminder of the cycle of life and the generations of people who have been a part of this church's long and storied history. It's a very direct, very human connection to the people who walked these streets long before we did. As we walk back out into the sanctuary, take a moment to just stand and listen. You can hear the quiet footsteps of other visitors, the soft clicks of cameras, and the distant sounds of the city outside. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of the past. The rustle of colonial dresses, the murmur of prayers, the passionate sermons about liberty and faith. It's a place where history isn't just something you read about in a book. It's something you can feel, something that surrounds you. Today, the Old North Church welcomes hundreds of thousands of visitors each year from all over the world. They come to see the place where the signal was hung, to learn about the American Revolution, and to experience a tangible piece of history. The Church Foundation works tirelessly to preserve this landmark and to educate the public about its importance. Through guided tours, educational programs, and special events, they ensure that the stories held within these walls will continue to be told for generations to come. The Old North Church stands as a powerful symbol. It's a symbol of courage, a symbol of freedom, and a symbol of enduring faith. It reminds us that our nation's history was shaped by ordinary people who did extraordinary things. It's a place that invites quiet reflection, encouraging us to think about the values upon which America was founded, and our own role in carrying those values forward. So, the next time you find yourself in Boston, make sure to walk the Freedom Trail to the North End. Step inside the Old North Church, sit in one of the box pews, look up at the steeple, and let the history wash over you. It's more than just a stop on a tourist map. It's an experience that connects you to the very heart of the American story, a story that is still being written today. Thank you so much for joining me on this virtual tour. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more stories from history. We'd love to have you in our community. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever noticed how a single object can hold centuries of stories within it? A simple lantern, for example. We see them as charming decorations, casting a warm, inviting glow. But what if I told you that for one town, 2 simple lanterns hanging in a church steeple once held the fate of a nation? Today, we journey back in time to a night shrouded in tension and uncertainty, to uncover the story of how a signal of war was transformed into an enduring symbol of peace. This is the story of the lanterns in the Old North Church, a tale that echoes through the annals of American history. It's a story many of us think we know, often simplified to a catchy rhyme. 1 if by land, and 2 if by sea. But the reality was far more complex, fraught with danger, and built on a network of brave individuals who risked everything for an ideal. The year is 1775. The city of Boston is a powder keg, ready to explode. British troops, the Redcoats, occupy the city, their presence a constant source of friction with the colonists. The air is thick with whispers of rebellion, and secret societies like the Sons of Liberty are working in the shadows, preparing for a conflict they believe is inevitable. At the heart of this network is a man whose name would become legendary. Paul Revere, a silversmith by trade. Revere was a master connector, a trusted messenger for the patriot cause. He and his fellow riders had established a sophisticated intelligence system to monitor British troop movements. They knew something was coming. The only questions were when and how. The British plan was to march from Boston to the nearby towns of Lexington and Concord. Their mission, to seize a cache of weapons and ammunition stockpiled by the Colonial militia, and to arrest two prominent Patriot leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. If they succeeded, it would be a devastating blow to the burgeoning revolutionary movement. The Patriots needed a way to alert the countryside the moment the British made their move. The challenge was immense. Boston was essentially an island, connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of land called the Boston Neck. The British could either march across this neck by land or row across the Charles River to Cambridge by sea. Time was of the essence. A warning sent too late would be useless. This is where the Old North Church and its towering steeple enter our story. At Bentuno, its sexton, Robert Newman, was a staunch patriot. The church's rector, Mather Byles Jr., was a loyalist, but Newman and others, like Captain John Pooling Jr., were part of the secret network. They devised a brilliant, simple, and incredibly risky plan. Paul Revere would arrange for a signal to be sent from the steeple, the highest point in Boston, visible across the river in Charlestown. One lantern if the British were marching by land across the Boston Neck. 2 lanterns if they were taking the water route by sea. On the night of April 18, 1775, the whispers turned into reality. Revere received intelligence that the British troops were preparing to move out. They were gathering at the foot of Boston Common, their boats waiting in the back bay. Their route was by sea. The signal had to be given. Revere himself had to get out of Boston to carry the message in person, but he also needed a backup. The lanterns were that backup. A silent alarm to watchers across the river. Imagine the tension of that moment. Robert Newman, key in hand, had to sneak into his own church, under the watchful eyes of British soldiers billeted nearby. He had to climb the 191 steps of the steeple, a journey into darkness and uncertainty. With him, he carried 2 lanterns. Each step up the creaking wooden staircase would have been agonizing. Every shadow a potential enemy. Once at the top, in the belfry, he looked out over a city holding its breath. He hung the first lantern. Then, the second. For just under a minute, 2 points of light pierced the darkness. A fleeting but powerful message to Wershan. In Charlestown, Patriot eyes were fixed on that steeple. The signal was received, and riders were dispatched into the countryside, spreading the alarm. The regulars are coming out. Meanwhile, Paul Revere was undertaking his own perilous journey. He was rowed across the Charles River, right under the nose of the British warship HMS Somerset. Once on the other side, he borrowed a horse and began his legendary midnight ride, his voice shouting the warning that would ignite the flames of the American Revolution. The lanterns in the steeple had served their purpose. The plan worked. The militia was alerted. The battles of Lexington and Concord, which took place the very next day, marked the first military engagements of the Revolutionary War. The shot heard round the world had been fired, and it all started with a silent signal of light. 4 years after, the story of the lanterns became a local legend, a tale passed down through generations. But it was in 1861, with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride, that the story was cemented in the American consciousness. Longfellow's stirring verses, written on the eve of another great national conflict, the Civil War, immortalized the image of the lanterns and the heroism of that night. While the poem took some artistic liberties, for instance, it was Newman and Pooling, not Revere, who hung the lanterns. It captured the spirit of the event perfectly. It transformed a historical fact into a national myth, a symbol of vigilance, courage, and the power of a few individuals to change the course of history. Today, the Old North Church still stands proudly in Boston's North End. It's the city's oldest surviving church building and a cherished historical landmark. Visitors from all over the world walk its aisles and gaze up at the steeple, trying to imagine the weight of the moment on that April night. And the tradition of the lanterns? It continues. Every year, on the eve of Patriots' Day, a Massachusetts holiday commemorating the battles, a ceremony is held. Descendants of the original patriots, community leaders, and citizens gather. 2 lanterns are once again ceremoniously lit and hung in the steeple. But their meaning has evolved. They are no longer a signal of impending conflict. The light that once warned of war now serves a different purpose. It shines as a symbol of peace, a reminder of the sacrifices made to achieve it. It represents unity, the coming together of a community to honor its shared history and values. And perhaps, most importantly, it symbolizes eternal vigilance. The lanterns remind us that freedom is not a given. It is something that must be constantly guarded, cherished, and actively participated in. They are a call to action for every generation, a reminder to stay informed, to be engaged, and to never take for granted the liberties that were so hard won. Standing there in the Boston night, seeing those 2 lights glowing high above the city, you can't help but feel a profound connection to the past. You realize that history isn't just something you read about in books. It's alive. It breathes in the old bricks of the church, in the enduring glow of the lanterns, and in the spirit of a nation that was sparked into existence by a clandestine signal in the dark. From a secret warning to a public celebration, the lanterns in the steeple have completed a remarkable journey. They are a testament to the idea that the tools of conflict can be reforged into symbols of reconciliation and hope. They teach us that memory is not just about looking back, but about carrying the lessons of the past forward to illuminate a better future. The 2 lights in the steeple are more than just a historical footnote. They are a beacon for all of us. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more hidden histories, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what other historical symbols you find fascinating. Until next time, stay curious.